I don't, I'm a notoriously bad proofreader. And I've been over these. Sheena's been over these. We made corrections. I found a ton of them this morning. One really egregious one. So I'll let you know when I find typos that, especially the egregious one, that you need to correct. As I was preparing this, I have to say, I haven't looked at our community history in terms of really backing up and making sure things were accurate in a long time. I might give a little bit of a short précis of it every time I do a pilgrimage up at Maria Stein. But yeah, just hitting highlights and depends on what group's there and all that. But to really put together a history is something I've really never done. The problem with it is we don't have an accurate history. It's rather difficult to really pin down with any kind of accuracies or surety some of what's happening. And so some of you that have done some work in the history, if I'm egregiously incorrect, correct me, but I think, some of it's a guess. And part of it is the problem that Mother Brunner did not leave any writings. If we had writings from her, that would help. We have what Father Brunner wrote about her, but I don't always trust what Father Brunner said, for sure. Some of you sisters will remember Sister Cordelia. God bless her memory. Cordelia was convinced that Mother Brunner could not read or write. And I find that interesting, mostly because, number one, we don't have any writings. We have no letters of hers. Isn't that odd? Particularly when we'll get down to it, she had 3 children in religious life. And it seems to me like, as a good mother that she was, she would have written letters to those folks. My mother wrote religiously to me every week. When we got weekly letters, when I entered, I was jealous. My brother was in the seminary at that time, and they got letters twice a week. And my mother wrote my brother twice a week. I was jealous. Why does he get 2 letters and I only get 1? But I just find it curious that Mother Brunner, we have nothing of hers. And I would guess, well, let me not get ahead of my story. I'll say a little bit more about that as we go through the history. So Mother Maria Anna Probst, Probst, her family named Brunner. Early years. She was born on October 1st, 1764. Do I have any food service people up here? Some we're going to try to get here. We have October 1st coming up, and the invitation is out already for those of us who are free from not living here to come join the celebration. So she was born on October 1st, 1764 in Rekenkein, Switzerland. Spoke German. That was a German Switzerland at that time. She had 3 siblings. Joseph, her older brother, she was the oldest daughter, Maria Anna, Jacob, Elizabeth, she had 4 siblings, and John. So basically 2 girls and 3 boys. They were poor. We'd call them dirt poor. They barely made it. So at age 12, now in Sister Helen Weber's account, she says late teens. I don't know which is true. Not with silver or gold, says at age 12, she left home to earn money to send back home to help with the food on the table and help with her siblings. Age 12 in those days, in late 18th century, basically would have been an adult for all practical purposes. So what we can guess is for sure, if she went to school, it was very early on and never completed anything that there's any record of it. And it's not unusual. In fact, several of my aunts, when they finished, well, they didn't finish high school. When they finished the 8th grade, my mom is from Mercer County, Farm County, Ohio. They came to Dayton and became housekeepers and nannies in wealthy homes here in Dayton. In fact, we used to laugh. Dayton is a kind of a bedroom community for Mercer County. So this is a German tradition that goes through a long, long number of generations. So she left home at age 12 to earn money to help support the family. She became a servant girl in the home of Nicholas Brunner, a wealthy landowner. So she went from probably not much more than a hovel, sharing it with a large number of family members, to a wealthy landowner home where she became the homemaker. From an early life, she learned prayerfulness and piety from her parents. It was a very devout Catholic family into which she was born. She was at the Brunner family, and it's kind of a Cinderella story, I think, because eventually she married the eldest son, Johann Baptist Brunner, on November 25th, 1793, which means she was 29 when she got married. So if she went to the Brunner household as a servant at age 12, that meant for 17 years she worked as a servant. If she went at later age, it maybe more like maybe 10 years. So there's kind of an interesting discrepancy or history in there, as you would know. What I would say is, no matter how many years there, she learned how to serve others. She learned how to be attentive to others. But as the eldest daughter in their family, in her own poor family, she probably from a very early age learned how to help her mother and serve. So Herr Bunner, where's Sheena? Sheena, can I tell him a story on you? When Sheena was proofreading this, she said, she circled that and said, I think that's a typo. So I emailed her back and said, Frau McCormick, Herr is German for Mr. And I left it because that's how, that's how Not With Silver or Gold addressed him. So Herr Bunner bought part of the family's Beibelberg estate and moved his bride. Is the R off of there? Okay, that's a typo, so scratch off the R. Moved his bride there. So she went from being a servant girl in a large household to being the wife and the mother, and no doubt a large household. I've been at her home, not in it, but by it. It's up in the Alps there in Switzerland, and it's a substantial farmhouse, manor house, really, for all practical purposes. So she didn't exactly live in poverty once she moved to the Brunner household. She had 6 children. Nicholas Joseph, her eldest son, who entered eventually the Benedictines at Kloster Maria Stein, Francis de Sales, Father Francis de Sales Brunner, who we'll be talking a lot about recently. When I do my presentations at Maria Stein, I like to say, people always ask me, who is Maria Stein? In fact, a few months ago, somebody said, do you think they were related to Edith Stein? And I said, no, the problem is Maria Stein is not a who, it's a what. It's a Benedictine monastery in Switzerland. For those of you not familiar, Stein is the German word for rock. And so it's Maria im Stein is actually the name. So it's Mary in the rock. And that goes back to a lovely story that I like to tell. In the Swiss Alps, a mother was out shepherding the sheep in the Alps, and she had her little son with her, and as little boys are wont to do, they don't listen and they don't stay where they're supposed to, and he kind of wandered too close to the edge of the path, and fell off the mountain. Well, Mama was pretty worried, obviously, ran down the mountain to find her son, and he's sitting there perfectly unhurt, not a scratch on him, with a flower and just kind of pulling petals off. And she said, "Didn't you just fall? What happened?" And he said, "Oh, a beautiful lady dressed in blue caught me and put me here and told me that when I'm found, I should tell you that they're to build a chapel in her honor." Well, nobody would believe him. A little dumb kid, make up stories to get out of punishment for being too close to the edge of the path. Well, a number of years later, an older shepherd gentleman stumbled and fell off at the same place. Same thing happened. And this time he was believed. And if any of you have been to Kloster Maria Stein in Switzerland, you go into the Abbey Church, the Basilica Church, and you go down steps. I think there's an elevator now. You go down pretty many steps, and you're in a natural cave in the Swiss Alps. And in that natural cave, which is pretty good size, well, there's a string of them actually, where Mary is probably just about this size. Then there's a natural niche in that cave, and that's where the statue of Maria im Stein is, in that natural niche. And it's a very crudely carved statue. It's not attractive to me at all. Some peasant, no doubt, carved that statue way back when this all happened, and it's been there ever since, and the people clothe it, and flowers all over the place, and whatever. It's quite lovely. So Maria Stein is Maria im Stein, Mary in the rock. So Francis de Sales Brunner started out as a Benedictine priest at Kloster Maria Stein. I'll talk more about him later. Second child was Maria Anna, named after the mother, who died before she was 2 years old. Not unusual back in those days to have a number of babies die before they get very old. Then the third daughter, they just changed the names around, Anna Maria. Then Joseph John Baptist, after his father. Urs Joseph, he became a Jesuit. And then Maria Anna Francis, who entered the Visitation Order. So she had 6 children, half of them entered religious life. So that also can tell us something about the piety within the Brunner household. And nothing I've ever read says anything about Johann Baptist Brunner and his piety, but he certainly didn't block it to have 3 children enter religious life. Father Brunner, after he's ordained, let me fill in a little bit more. Father Brunner enters at Maria Stein, professes his vows at Maria Stein, the Benedictine cloister, but he was not happy with Maria Stein. He felt it was too lax. He wanted more strictness in the way he led his religious life. So he left Maria Stein and went to France, joined a Trappist community, who are still, even to this day, one of the most austere religious communities there is. And that was fine. That met his spiritual needs. But then France was in civil war, and the state closed down many of the monasteries and stuff, and his got closed down. So he went back to Switzerland and just kind of functioned on his own. And at first he opened a boys' school in an old castle that had been empty, Castle Loewenberg, and he used his mother's money to help support it and all that. I should say, used the Brunner family money to help support it. And so Father Brunner establishes a boys' school at Castle Loewenberg, and Mother Brunner goes to live there. And I would say, we've always had this thing in the community about we were founded for a spirituality and not a ministry, and so one of the sisters challenged me on that not too long ago. And I said, okay, if we want to say we originally had a ministry than it would be to be servants, to be housekeepers, to be cooks. Because that's exactly why Mother Brunner went to Castle Loewenberg. Well, that kind of took care of the conversation. So she went to live there, and as the story goes, and it's in Not With Silver or Gold, she asked that she be assigned a bedroom near chapel so she could be near the Blessed Sacrament. Mother Brunner had a very strong devotion to the Blessed Sacrament that no doubt she grew up with. And that's an important part of our history. So Mother Brunner accompanies her son, Father Brunner, later on to Rome. And there, Mother Brunner was introduced to precious blood spirituality. Father Brunner isn't there yet. Mother Brunner brought the precious blood spirituality back. So she kind of married precious blood spirituality of the missionaries with her devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. But through all of her life, adoration before the Blessed Sacrament was an incredibly important part of Mother Brunner's prayer life. Mother Brunner returned to Castle Loewenberg from Rome in November 1833 and attracted the two women who were also maids there at the castle to help with these boys in this boys' school, who were already at the castle, to her fervent prayer life, focused on the Eucharist, and now adding to that the precious blood. So in a sense, it was Mother Brunner and these maids who formed kind of the original, if you will, the first nucleus of the community beyond Mother Brunner. In the spring of 1834, a year later, 6 women joined. And now there were enough women to begin night hours. And this is considered the founding date of our congregation. I had to go back to Sarah in the archives to say, why is 1834 this founding date of our congregation? What happened? And what it was these 6 women, most of them from Alsace, joined Mother Brunner. The question that I think we sisters face is, did Mother Brunner intend to found a congregation? My personal answer is no. I think she attracted women by the beauty of her own life, her own self-giving, the piety of her prayer, and her devotion to the Blessed Sacrament and the precious blood. I'll save my next comment for later. It was in 1835, a year later, that Father Brunner writes, and all we have is evidence of a scripted, handwritten, not duplicated, writes the first rule for the little community, and it was never published. I'm not sure where that is. Do we have it, Sarah? We have a copy. Is it in English? That doesn't help. Well, I guess Google Translator would work, but that'd be laborious. Someday I want to get at that. When I have nothing else to do and I quit doing all these presentations, there's a lot of things I want to do. And one of them is not only read that very first rule, but secondly, I want to compare that to the rule of St. Benedict, because I've always maintained that Father Brunner, being a Benedictine, writing these rules, what he knew was the rule of St. Benedict. So I think we are deeply influenced by the rule of St. Benedict, and I would like to do some comparative analysis of that and ferret that thought out. And I think that goes back to one of the Benedictine models is ora et labora, pray and work. Boy, does that define us German sisters of the precious blood, work and pray. That's what we do. And that's very, very deeply steeped in Benedictinism. Several rules followed, kind of an update as the community grew over the years, all rooted, I claim, in the rule of St. Benedict. That's my thought, but I think it's a pretty accurate thought, given who Father Brunner would be. Mother Brunner died January 15th, 1836, so really quite quickly after all this started happening, 2 years. And because of that, I would like to suggest Mother Brunner is really our spiritual foundress. I think Father Brunner is our organizational founder. I would say we have two founders, if you will. Father Brunner brought us to the United States. We're going to look at that shortly. But basically, he wrote the rules. He got us together. He kind of organized things. Mother Brunner was the inspiration. And it was her prayer life inspiration that attracted those early members. So I would claim Mother Brunner is our spiritual foundress. All right, from Switzerland to the United States. In 1838, so now we're going to skip ahead 2 more years. Mother Brunner is gone. She's died. In 1838, Father Brunner goes to Rome to petition the Holy Father about his vows in life. He's still technically a Trappist in solemn vows. And while this kind of bothered him, he was happy doing his own thing. Father Brunner, I think, did his own thing pretty much. But it bothered him because at solemn vows, you live in community and you have a superior, and Father Brunner was just flaking around. And so he went to Rome with the intention of having an audience with the Holy Father and asking what he needed to do about these solemn vows since he was not living in a community. There he met the missionaries of the Precious Blood and subsequently was dispensed by the Pope from his solemn vows and became a member of the Congregation of the Most Precious Blood on September 27th, 1838. So he now has a community to which he's attached, but not, this is surprising to many people when I tell them, the missionaries of the Precious Blood do not take vows. Canonically, they are not a religious congregation. They are a society of priests bound by the rule of charity. They make a promise to keep their constitution, but they do not take the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So, Precious Blood priests, for example, I know some of them who own their own homes. That's perfectly legitimate because they don't have the vow of poverty, and so on. Chastity is kind of self-explanatory, but they're not free to marry, in other words. So Father Brunner becomes a missionary of the Precious Blood. He was drawn to the missionaries because he always had this inclination in his heart. He wanted to be a missionary. Well, obviously, in a Benedictine monastery or a Trappist monastery, that's not going to happen. So this kind of he thought he would move toward what he was hoping could happen in his life. His desire was to go to India. Well, it didn't happen. But what did happen? While in Rome, he obtained ecclesiastical approval for the community of sisters at Loewenberg. So now we're getting closer to papal approbation for us as a congregation. And we became known as the Sisters Adorers of the Precious Blood. Very interesting to me because that's actually the title for the ASCs, the Adorers of the Precious Blood. The ASCs don't use C.PP.S, although their foundress was a spiritual directee of St. Gaspar, so they have a direct connection to the Missionaries of the Precious Blood in terms of its founding. The two women's communities that use C.PP.S are the O'Fallons and us. And the O'Fallons come the closest to getting the C.PP.S correct. I'm often asked, what in the world does C.PP.S mean? Well, first of all, PP is doubling a consonant is an indication of the Latin superlative, most. So the translation is the Latin is Congregatio Preciosissimi Sanguinis. The translation is the congregation of the most precious blood. And the O'Fallons use the Sisters of the Most Precious Blood. And they use C.P.P.S. We use C.P.P.S., but we just say Sisters of the Precious Blood. I find that interesting. We don't use most, and the missionaries don't. Now they're just missionaries of the precious blood. So the PP got lost in there somehow. The title for what used to be Corpus Christi is now the Solemnity of the Most Holy Body and Blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. So the liturgical years got it right. Somehow we just keep missing out on the most. So that's kind of interesting to me. All right, now here's my egregious mistake. I'm getting ahead of myself. Where am I? Way up there at the beginning. All right, September 20th, 1843, permission was granted for Father Brunner and companions to, expansion to the United States. Bishop Purcell of Cincinnati, we're not an archdiocese yet. We're just a diocese, and we were the westernmost diocese in the United States for years. Bishop Purcell of Cincinnati was interested in German-speaking missionaries coming to the United States to minister to the German Catholics in his Ohio diocese. I think that one got corrected. You don't have an extra I in that word? In diocese? Is that spelled correctly? Yeah, okay, then that one got corrected, thanks to Gina. All right, September 20th, 1843, permission was granted for Father Brunner and companions to embark for the United States. So Father Brunner finally gets his longing to be a missionary fulfilled, but not to India, to the United States. And he first came over with priests and brothers. There were 7 who came over. At the invitation, the express invitation of Bishop Purcell. In 1844, they arrived at St. Alphonsus Church in Peru, Ohio, which is up in Seneca County. Does Peru still exist? I think so. Near New Regal, which we consider the cradle of the community, where Bishop Purcell had assigned them. And I think they started out in a log cabin that had been empty and was there. And what I find funny is in 1846, 2 years later, the first sisters arrived at, I'm sorry. In 1844, the first group of 3 sisters joined them. Father Brunner kept going back and forth and back and forth. And he always brought people over. So he brought the first 3 sisters over. And when he brought the sisters over, the bishop insisted that the sisters have the log cabin. So I'm not sure what happened to the men, but they got kicked out of their home so the sisters could have a log cabin. I kind of like that. In 1846, we arrived at Maria Stein and then established 9 more foundations in Western Ohio. So these were the 10 foundations, and this goes back to my remarks about a very Benedictine structure. I always pay attention when I read our necrology at night at evening prayer. The necrology is a book we sisters have that lists all of our sisters from the very beginning, their death date and where they died. And then on the death dates, every day we mention them in our prayers. So our sisters are never, ever forgotten. And I find it, I play, with number one, when we look at these 10 original foundations, many of them had novices dying there, which means they had a novitiate at these houses. So Maria Stein was not the mother house at that point, where everybody came there for formation and whatever. Each of those foundations was pretty much a self-contained community. They were large. They sat on large farm tracts because, for all practical purposes, they were incredibly self-sufficient. I think probably about the only stuff they bought were coffee and sugar. They grew and did everything else. And we had at one time at Maria Stein, we had a vineyard, and so many of us can remember the vineyard on the way down to the lake here on Salem Heights property, when me and Helen Mormon and a few other people started making wine. And I have a hunch those vines originally our vines came from Maria Stein, and I have a hunch Maria Stein vines came from Germany, Europe. So I think that was good German wine, is what my suspicion was. So we just got all these kind of roots. But my point is, they did everything. And when you look at the museum up at Maria Stein, you know, the artwork, the handiwork, the shoes. You know, I've always said, I don't think we have anybody living now, but they made these wooden shoes to work the fields. No wonder the poor sisters had bad feet. When I was apostolate over in that building, down in St. Joseph's workshop, the sisters will nod, they know what I'm talking about, we still had the shoe stuff down there, you know, to make and repair and do whatever shoes. And so we were literally self-sufficient. Grew our own food. We were still a truck farm when I entered the community here. And I was apostolate in 1963 and a novice in 1964. And in the summertime, Sister Hilaria, remember Sister Hilaria, was the farm sister, took care of all the farm around here. And we would get sent out to pick, collect, do whatever the produce when it was ready. And we had a bean patch outside, right outside the main door there. And after lunch in the heat of the afternoon in late summer, we'd go out to pick beans. And my class, we were kind of rambunctious anyway. My class got tired of picking beans. And then what happened is you picked beans one day and then you had a bean party the next day where you had to snip them and clean them and all that kind of stuff. And we didn't like that. So we kind of passed around the bean, and it was a big bean patch. It was probably a good quarter of an acre. So there were a lot of beans there. We kind of passed around, pull the plants up, spread the roots out, put enough dirt on to make them stand up, and then go to the next one. We stripped that whole bean patch that summer. The next day, Sister Hilaria came. I don't know what happened. I don't know what got into the bean patch last night. Every plant is dead. We all said, yeah, it worked. We took care of our beans. Someday we should get a little circle around here of the sisters telling you some of these stories of what went on. Luann, yes.
In our day, those who didn't get visitors were the ones that had to go out there and do their work.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
I was part of working one that never got visitors.
Okay.
Several of us, but now they said we're tired of that. We're not going to do that. So we band ourselves together to go outside, walk around, and look at all the license plates on the cars and see where they came from. They're visiting guys.
Well, by the time I was in formation with visiting time, the sisters, like from out west, were given permission. We kind of paired off. So I had two of the Westerners who just joined my family, you know, so they didn't have to go gardening. But we picked cherries, we picked apples, we picked tomatoes. We did, well, that we ate. I mean, that's how we ate. So it was a lot less expensive than going to the store because we had hundreds of people on the property at that time, especially when the high school was still open. I diverse, don't I? Yes, I do. So Father Brunner died. Okay, no, I keep getting ahead of myself. So in 1846, we arrived at Maria Stein and established 9 more foundations in Western Ohio. And I mentioned that this is a very typical Benedictine model. Benedictine houses, when they get so large, when they get 30 or 40 in the house, they break off. So an abbey becomes a dependent priory, and then the dependent priory becomes an independent priory as it grows, and as that grows, it becomes another abbey, and then breaks off, and so on. And that's kind of what happened to us. We just established all these individual houses. So when you're hearing the Decrology sisters, listen for the novices at Grunenwald and Mary's Camp and all these places. It's just an interesting historical indication that this is a very Benedictine model. Immediately arriving at Maria Stein, the sisters began hours of adoration. I suspect at the other large establishments as well, began hours of adoration, the prayer foundation from which all missionary endeavors flowed, and all work endeavors flowed. The community grew and expanded to other areas. Jay County, Indiana, 1854. Tennessee, 1874. Arizona, 1903. We established the first Catholic high school in the state of Arizona before it was even a state. And I'm sad to say I was the last Sister of the Precious Blood to teach there. When I left, there was a Sister of the Precious Blood still there, but she left the community. So a little bit of history involved in that. California, 1913, that's the academy, the Little Flower Academy, San Luis Rey, next to the mission there. Colorado, Missouri, North Dakota, Michigan, Chile in 1958, Guatemala in 1980, and then individuals were in some other states and areas as well. So we began to spread out a lot out west. We moved out west, mostly because we were meeting needs. Requests would come in for sisters, and we simply were meeting needs. Father Brunner died on December 29th, 1859 at Schellenberg, and he's buried there. I've been to his tomb. Here's the egregious mistake. 1935, the Mother House moved to there's another type, from Maria Stein, M-A-R-I-A, that one we didn't catch, to date, and that's not correct. It was June 2nd, 1923. I don't know where I got 1935 from, but that's not correct. So if you have a, excuse me, if you have a pen, correct that, please. 1923, we moved to Dayton. Mother Emma was the Superior General at that time, and she met great resistance when she wanted to move the sisters to Dayton. So divisions in the community, those who wanted to go one way, those who want to go another way, is nothing new. I think as soon as you get two people together, you've got division, in my opinion. But the, Mother Emma wanted to move to Dayton for two reasons, basically. As the parishes in the northern part of the diocese, or by now Archdiocese of Cincinnati, started growing, they also began to establish grade schools and high schools eventually, and they came to the sisters for teachers. We had at Maria Stein what we called a normal school, and all my hunting hasn't given me any information about what that was, except probably not much more, excuse me, than high school for girls. Mother Emma thought if we were going to move into education, we really needed more education than high school. And so her intent was to come to Dayton. The Marianists had already established the University of Dayton, so we could be close at hand to the University of Dayton to get degrees. So that was one reason. The other reason is the sisters had desired perpetual exposition. We don't need permission for perpetual adoration. If you got the folks, you can do it. If you want perpetual exposition, that is removing the Blessed Sacrament from inside the tabernacle and placing it out to be visible, that's the difference between adoration and exposition. You need permission for that. And the Archbishop would never give the sisters permission for two reasons. Up at Maria Stein, the chapel was too tiny, and at that point we were still, for all practical purposes, semi-cloistered. So mixing lay people and sisters together in that chapel simply wasn't going to work. If you ever go, those of you who've never been to Maria Stein, if you ever go up there, we have Father Brunner's relic case in front of what used to be where the lay people came to Mass and received Holy Communion. That window went up and down, and they would kneel there to receive Holy Communion. So the lay people basically went to Mass there at the convent in the relic chapel, because they didn't. The sisters' chapel was essentially semi-cloistered. We were pretty enclosed community, and now, as I learned about this and think about this, I understand much more why Mary Catherine Kunk, Sister Electa, was my novice director. Incredible woman with great vision. And Mary Catherine used to say to us over and over and over and over again, "We are not monastics." Where'd that come from? Well, she was basically reacting against a long history of, in fact, we lived a kind of semi-monastic life. And of course, I didn't know the history in this way back then, in terms of what she was trying to react to. So on June 2nd, 1923, our mother house moved from Rekenkein to Dayton because the community had desired perpetual exposition and college degrees. By moving to Dayton, we had a chapel big enough, and the Archbishop's requirement was that we have lay people join us in our hours of exposition. So it had to be an open kind of a thing. And I'm kicking myself because my aunt, who lived on Free Pike, was a founding member of Precious Blood Parish, was part of the lay adoration guild for Salem Heights. And she was the last secretary. When she died, I came across the index card catalog of the members of that guild. And Sarah, don't shoot me, but I threw it away. I should have never done that. That was probably the last, yeah, she's saying no. The last written record of all the people. And I'll tell you, it was a thick file. So we had an awful lot of people involved in our adoration at Salem Heights. Early on, by the time I entered, not so much, but certainly early on we did. So those were the two reasons we came here. And but the big thing was that we had permission now to have perpetual exposition, which meant 24 hours a day, 2 at a time, we were in chapel. But what I find interesting is from here, where we got the permission, somehow it kind of spread out, because I know Maria Stein had perpetual exposition. I know Rome City did. Maybe just those two. But it did, so we kind of cheated a bit, I think, and took advantage of the permission here in Dayton and just spread it out. The other interesting thing is, I remember as a kid, I said my aunt lived over on Free Pike. Denlinger Road was still a stone road, a gravel road. Wasn't even paved yet. This was not a built-up area. It was huge farmland. And of course, Mother Emma bought a lot of farmland because, as I said, we basically farmed. And we had the farmhouse over on that little hill, which got torn down. Now what we call the farmhouse, where we have sisters living, we had farmers living in there, the people that worked our farm for us. But what's interesting is this land was 2 miles outside the city limits of Dayton. So we were literally out in the boonies. Now, we have a Dayton address here, so we're just kind of enveloped in the city, if you will. Lots have changed in the 100 years that we've been here. On November 28th, 1946, another important date, our Constitution, there's another spelling mistake there, was approved, and at that time we became a papal community. Before that, for those of you who are not familiar with this, religious congregations are of two kinds: a diocesan community or archdiocesan community, and papal communities. We were a diocesan community up until 1946, which meant we were directly under the bishop of the diocese. So basically, our major superior was the Archbishop of Cincinnati. Now, that's got some advantages, because everything is kind of local. You can get decisions made quicker and all of that. It's got disadvantages. When you have a bishop that likes you, you can get what you want. When you have a bishop who doesn't like you, you've got real struggles. So there's pluses and minuses. We still have a good number of communities in the United States that are diocesan communities. Many of the Franciscan communities. The Franciscan community up in Wisconsin, that's a break off of us, when the group broke off from St. Joseph, Ohio, and started up toward north of St. Cloud, They're a diocesan community even to this day. So it's not unusual even today. Especially larger communities are papal communities, which means we are directly under Rome, and specifically the dicastery, the Sacred Congregation for Religious Life and Secular Institutes. So we are now under Rome, not under the Archbishop of Cincinnati. However, there are certain things that we still have to go to the Archbishop of Cincinnati to do. We're not completely free. We can't thumb our nose at the Archbishop. And annually, the president of the congregation has to send to the bishop, every diocese in which we have sisters actively ministering, the names of the sisters in the diocese. So it's kind of a way, I suppose, to keep tabs on us, if you will. All right, number 4. Oh, I got good time. Effects of Vatican II. I would say until the renewal of Vatican II, we were still, for all practical purposes, largely Benedictine monastic in style, kind of semi-cloistered. You know, we kept a rule of silence. Insane, I thought. You know, I had one of the largest classes that ever entered. We were 42, more chiefs than Indians, which was kind of a little bit of a problem. You want us to keep quiet all day long except for 1 hour when we sat around at recreation mending our t-shirts? I mean, it just didn't compute. I prayed more penances for breaking silence than I could shake a stick at. Yeah, I talked a lot back then, right now. So, I'm sorry? Yeah, chapter of faults. Mary, well, when we didn't do it as postulants, but we had chapter of faults as novices. And what chapter of faults was once a month on our Sunday, our monthly day of recollection, first Sunday of, no, not the first Sunday. No, that was visiting Sunday, wasn't it? First Sunday was second Sunday visit. Anyway, on our, whatever the Sunday day of recollection was, we always had what we called a chapter of faults, which they gathered in your groups. So as novices, we would gather. And each sister would stand up and confess her faults to the rest of the group. I don't know that with Mary Catherine, we ever got through the chapter of faults that we didn't have her cracking up. I mean, again, it was just so artificial. And the rule was, if I stood up and said, I broke my silence, I went to St. Joseph workshop without permission, I went up for a walk with one person without permission, because we were never allowed to be with one person. We always had to be with at least 2, so we didn't have particular friendships, and blah, 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 blah. If I missed something, somebody else could accuse me of something. Well, you put a bunch of 18-year-old kids together, what do you think's going to happen? And like I said, I don't think my class ever got through a chapter of faults. Eventually, Mary Catherine pretty well stopped it. It was just it was fun, actually. It never did what it was supposed to do, but it was kind of fun. If we took it seriously, I don't think any of us took it seriously. So we kept a rule of silence. We had a common horarium, which meant our day schedule in every house in the United States was the same. And you fit into it, no matter what you did. That was your schedule. It was like a monastic life writ large. And it just wasn't practical by the time we had grown large enough. When I entered in officially in January of '64, we peaked as a congregation at about 800, a few over 800. We're not an international community. We do have sisters in Chile and Guatemala, but we've never been an international community with our general offices in Rome. Some of the international communities have 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 sisters. So we've never ever, as religious life goes, we're medium to small, actually, as a congregation. We were founded here in the United States and basically have stayed here. We still have a foundation over in Schellenberg, Switzerland, but my experience of them is they're semi-cloistered, if not, well, when I visited them, they were completely cloistered because I was professed sister and everybody with me, and they wouldn't even let us beyond the visiting room. Subsequently, when some sisters went over there, they've opened up a little bit, but that's another story. So, the Vision of Vatican II, Perfecte Caritatis, for us religious, is an incredibly important document. And I did a commentary for it for a book, a chapter in a book on commentaries on the documents of Vatican II. And when I went back to read that, I actually cried through most of it. I thought, boy, if we lived this, we wouldn't have vocation crisis. What Perfecte Caritatis calls us to is astounding, Essentially, gospel living, which is what Vatican II calls us to. Perfecte Caritatis is a decree of the Council calling for a renewal of religious life. Now, the Council concluded in 1965. We had, and the rule was, when the next chapter, for us every 4 years, when we elect officials and all of these kinds of things, do the business of the congregation. The next chapter any congregation could have, they could do what Perfecte Caritatis called for in terms of renewal and make the changes. We were lucky because in 1966, shortly after the council, less than a year after the council closed, we had our 1966 regularly scheduled chapter, so we called it our renewal chapter. So with that chapter, what happened is visible things for us as a community started to happen. So the visible effects of our renewal chapter. The habit was no longer required. We had a choice whether we wanted to still wear the full habit, a modified habit, or no habit. And what people don't realize, we were in a gray habit by then, and the gray habit had enough material in it that I remember sitting and picking those seams apart so we could get every inch of fabric out of them. That's a tedious job. And we remade our habits into suits. But people in formation, I was a scholastic then, we weren't allowed to make suits for us until the professed sisters who wanted to change all had their suits. So we picked their habits apart and made suits for them. And then finally, we could make contemporary clothes or modern clothes or whatever for us. So we were no longer required to wear habits. Common horarium was no longer observed. So wherever you were, the horarium could be a little bit open and more suited to the type of house and the ministry that was there. I think one of the most interesting and perhaps challenging things we decided was what's called open placement. Prior to this, we still receive what we call our missioning statement, but basically back then we called it our obedience, and it was generally given to us on August 15th in chapel. I remember I graduated from UD in August of 66, and August 68, and so I would have gotten my first obedience to go out to teach. And I was convinced I was going to go to Carroll, because I knew the sister who taught math at Carroll was leaving the community. So I figured, I was a math major, started out. So I figured, okay, I'm going to end up teaching math. And our director of education, Sister Barbara Webkin, called me and said, do you think you could teach chemistry? I said, yeah, if I could stay a page ahead of the students, I could probably, squeak by. So I was convinced, because Mary Bernard Reichert was the science teacher at Carroll, and I knew she had more than she could handle. I was convinced I was going to go teach at Carroll High School. So I remember being in chapel. This is at 6:30 in the morning. They gave us our obediences, and I opened it up, and my obedience said, San Luis Rey, California. I almost let out a scream. I'd never been west of Ohio State border in my life. They sent 5 of us from my class out west with a car that needed to go to Phoenix. We were dropping Paula Giro off for a home visit. That was another thing. We could go home for a home visit in St. Joseph, Missouri. And you know how much money they gave us to cross country now, way before credit cards? You know how much money we had to cross country? $100. 5? Well, we dropped Paula off after the first day, so that left us with 4. But that meant food. Now, we stayed in Missouri at Sedalia. We stayed, then we drove to Colorado and stayed at the seminary there where our sisters were. We had one overnight between Colorado and Phoenix. Then the issue was, we got to Phoenix, that's where the car was. That's where the other 3 people were staying. They were from Phoenix. Nobody figured out how to get me from Phoenix to San Lu. So, okay, now what do I do? One of my classmates who was from Phoenix, her parents kindly drove me up to San Lu, and that's an 8-hour trip. That wasn't easy. So, I mean, all kinds of really interesting, funny, maybe not so funny things happened back in those days. But open placement, instead of getting obediences, we could choose our own ministries. The advantage of that is it wasn't a matter of putting square pegs in round holes. Many sisters got put into ministries that they weren't suited for, they didn't like, and I don't know that you can bring the best out of people when they're not doing what they truly love. So I think open placement certainly solved one problem, but I think it created a different problem, and that is we went where the jobs were. So then many of us moved out, found jobs more suited to us, but then we ended up living alone, and all the challenges along with that in terms of continuing community. So I think open placement had a huge effect on us as a community, both positively and negatively. There was greater interaction with laity and relatives. We couldn't go home before that. We had visitors, the parents and whatever come. If people lived far away, it was too bad, whatever, but now we could go home. Although very early on, a bunch of us would drive together, and we had to pay the community 10 cents a mile. And I never figured that out because it was all community money anyway. So anyway, we've done some funny things. Greater freedom to develop individual gifts and talents. I think that's incredibly important. So what happened then is our ministry began to diversify. We started out largely home arts. We worked in a lot of seminaries and educational institutions. From there, we moved into education and schools with requests. We basically met the requests that came in for us. So we've never been a community founded for a specific ministry. Education became more pronounced than anything else, but certainly we were not founded to be teachers. It's a matter of meeting needs and developing. But since Perfecte Caritatis, we've moved into a lot of different directions, and people have been able to develop themselves as they saw fit, which I think is a great good. The public commitment to works of social justice began to develop. We didn't do a whole lot publicly around that, but that began to develop, and Sister Rose Helene Wildenhouse, Sister having a senior motive, help me, Dorothy Kammer here in Dayton was well noted. Some of you might not know that the House of Bread was founded by her. I don't know what the other place, what's that called now? Homeful was founded by her. She had like a food place, but that kind of fell after a while. But Dorothy did an awful lot. Rose Helene moved St. Leonard's in the direction it went into. St. Mary's Development Corporation came out of her work and whatever. So we've had some women, especially in the Dayton area, but otherwise too, who have made huge contributions to society and bettering society. At this time, we also began a diminishment in numbers. The large classes weren't entering. Challenges of traditional values and practices and contemporary needs and responses started coming in. So we get to final comments. And now? I don't know. Monastic life is the constant in religious life as a charism of the church. Religious life, particularly monastic life, well, we started with hermits, the Eremitical movement, and then quickly moved into what's called Cenobitic life, coming together to live community, monastic life. That's the earliest form, and it's been a constant since the earliest strata of the church. And I think that'll still be a constant. I'm fascinated by the fact that monasteries, both of men and women, contemplative communities, still, but see, they've never been large. So they're not worried about getting in large numbers. If they get one person every 2 or 3 years, that keeps them going. So that's the constant. Is religious life going to go away? Nope. I'm a firm believer that the Holy Spirit is in charge of the church. And the Holy Spirit is guiding the church, has done a good job, I think, for 2,000 years, in spite of all of us trying to mess her up. And, it'll still happen. Apostolic life, which is kind of how we consider ourselves, out in the apostolate, out in ministry, working, really is a phenomenon that came about after the Industrial Revolution. So in the late 1700s, early 1800s, almost all of the religious congregations founded today came from that period. And basically we were founded to meet the needs of the emerging middle class. We ourselves, I think, peaked, as I already said, around about 800. In the United States, I think we peaked at about 163,000 at one time. Now, in an immigrant country, to have a workforce, which is what we were, of 160,000 people, who founded the education program in the United States, the hospital program in the United States, the social worker program in the United States, and a lot of other things? That's at the backs of we women religious. I think a lot of people don't realize the contribution women religious have made to the United States. It's huge. But most of those works have been taken over by other kinds of agencies, government, or whatever. So what's the next form of religious life that's going to emerge to meet the needs of the church and the people? I think it isn't emerging. And those of us living in this transition period always find it difficult because the future is uncertain. Forms of religious life respond to the needs of the church. Contemplation in action is the key. Prayer always results in good works. Was it last week that we had that daily readings from James, the Epistle of James? The fight about faith or works. It's not a fight. You need both of them, as James tells us. And I think that's where we are. I think we have to be comfortable being in this transition period. We have to surrender to the work of the Spirit and have hope and faith and confidence in the fact that the Spirit guides the church. And what the church needs for the future will happen. Why do we say this with great certainty? Because for 2,000 years, that's what's happened. I'm about 3 minutes over time. Sorry about that. Thank you. We'll turn the tape off now.